Hello. So I'm going to present now my takeaway speech for the MMIP seminar. So start out with just my research question, which was just very simple. Why is there an MMIP crisis in Michigan, and what is being done to respond to the emergency? The thesis is that historical oppression, lack of coordination between agencies, and racial bias um, played a role in this. And I think really to understand the MMIP crisis, it helps to look back to the beginning. And in the beginning was when the indigenous people were here, way before the colonists came. And what the evidence shows is that these indigenous communities were thriving. We talked about in class how sexual violence was unheard of. The research, I saw evidence that in the Upper Peninsula of all places, that there was this really extensive, sophisticated farming, that they like this ridge system that helped them sustain these harsh climates. It was very impressive. Evidence also showed gender roles that were more egalitarian, more sophisticated than what the Europeans were practicing at the time. But the MMIP crisis, the missing and murdered indigenous people, really started almost immediately when Columbus or these other Europeans, the French, the British, they came to the New World. They brought disease, smallpox, measles. The indigenous didn't have the antibodies to fight against them. So a lot of people were decimated by that. Even evidence that the earth cooled because of just the massive population decline. And this was also exacerbated by the wars that were fought throughout the country. And once the wars were really over, like one of the Civil War, Henry Pratt, I quote him in this paper, and he was built one of the first like off-reservation boarding schools, and it just seems like he had hatred for these people, and basically the evidence was, whether looking in Michigan or in Canada, just unmarked graves, death records, evidence showing abuse, malnutrition, really rough. And so basically, and now looking at what's being done today. So I go through like the Michigan task force that was established under Dennis, the Michigan Attorney General, last year. And while there's been some press releases and a lot of like intertribal work and partnerships between state and federal, I still think that there's more, and wasn't as much evidence as I would like to see on the internet for that, but I imagine there's more out there. That might have just been a limitation on my research. Also looked at Michigan tribal response, like the Sault Ste. Marie tribe, and these like other different intertribal kind of nonprofits like Indian Legal Services that offered really good help, and I think are doing at the front line, offering resources, culturally appropriate care. I also mentioned the Road to Healing, Pelson, which you, Professor Single, recommended, and I thought that transcript, these 12 different stops, hearing from people talking about intergenerational trauma, was important. Other states, as we've talked about, created many task forces, have passed laws to work on this. I think this really is in response. We mentioned that some of these states, I can't remember exactly, but like a Wyoming, where it's representing some of these small percentages of the population, but like are just disproportionately represented in statistics, like missing people. The federal response, there's been some, just running out of time here, but the Savannahs Act, the just VAWA, the reauthorization of VAWA, the Tribal Law and Order Act, some other initiatives, the MMU, that are working. I also mentioned Canada, as we've talked about, that has gone further and called this a genocide, but Work still to be done. How they're mentioned as like a leader in healthcare, but some of these more remote communities don't have access to that or must travel very far. And just concluding with that, the historical oppression, the lack of coordination, the racial bias, has all like led over the last 400 years from when the colonists came to now of a real crisis. And I think one potentially creative idea going forward for the U.S. is when it celebrates 250th birthday this summer is to incorporate the indigenous leaders' accomplishments into that celebration. I cite that in 2017 when Canada celebrated their birthday, it was criticized for not having an honest and realistic history of what happened. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it.